Hello and welcome to the Emotional Work Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human condition. And this episode is a special one because it's been a year, unbelievably, listeners. It's been 12 months of the Emotion at Work podcast, and I began my podcast journey a year ago, last May, with a kind of reflection from me about why I was doing the podcast and what it was about and where it was coming from. And then about halfway through the year, I did another kind of pause and reflection. And in this episode, you're going to get to hear more from me as well. So I'm sorry about that, but them's are the breaks as the listeners. You don't get to control what you get in your ears. I get the gift of giving that to you. So today, you're going to get to hear more from me. And I know that today's guest is a mix of excited and I guess a little bit nervous and curious about how it's going to go, because today's guest has no idea what's coming really. They've done a little bit of prep, but they're going to have to give away control, and I'm not sure how our guest feels about giving away control. So it's going to be an interesting one today. I'm not sure.
Excuse me. Is that is Phil, isn't it?
Hello.
What
do you think you're doing? I am on my opening monologue.
Well, fair listener, please do not adjust your set. This is Mark Gilroy. I'm going to be your guest host for the podcast today. And as Phil's just been suggesting, the reason for this is because the podcast itself is about to turn a year old. And of course, for the last year, we've been listening to one person's voice for the last roughly 2 weeks. And we never really get to hear from him in some detail. So he usually asks the questions. This time that's going to be me. Phil's going to be giving some answers. So let's get him back and into the guest seat. Hello. It's the emotion geek himself, Phil Wilcox.
Hey, how you doing? Welcome to the... No, I can't say that because... No. Close. Oh, you know what? It's nice to have your voice in my ears. You have such a lovely radio voice. And there's no kind... I know there's like implicature around that you've got... no face for radio, gags are coming. You do have a wonderful... radio voice, Mr. Gilroy.
That is very kind of you, sir. Very kind of you, sir. And as we both know, you have a wonderful singing voice too.
Absolutely, yes.
Having duetted in the past.
And we'll put a link to that. No, that's me. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes, everybody. We'll put a link to the duet in the show notes.
So in this podcast, we're going to be doing a year in review of what's been going on, hopefully finding out a little bit more about your story, about some of the conversations and the journey that's got us to this place so far, and maybe looking at what's coming in the future. But before we get started, back in episode 5, you had the wonderful Georgie announcing on as a guest, and you guys talked about disrupting the standard network type conversations of what do you do? And she had some brilliant unexpected questions, and I know you've kept that as a bit of a theme.
I do, and I love it. I always find it a fascinating kind of segue into the podcast.
It works really well, I think. It works really well. And I've since used them at many networking type conversations. Has been met with a mixtures of delight, fear, shock, surprise, but mainly a smile, which is always good. Yeah. So
I was just before you do, I was reading a post from her on Facebook yesterday, and she got on a train and she went to put her bag down, and she put her bag on someone's toes. And the person said, "Oh, don't worry, it didn't hurt." And she went, "Oh, next time I'll try harder." And then proceeded to have a wonderful kind of 4 or 5 minute conversation in between tube stops on that basis. So I love the way she goes about just because that's just not something you would say, is it? If you accidentally put your bag on someone's foot, they say, "Oh, don't worry, it didn't hurt," and you go, "Sorry," and no, she goes with, "I'll try harder next time." I love that.
Wonderful. I love that story. Are you ready for an unexpected question?
I am, yes, I am.
Okay, so, I'm into my tech, so I thought we'd do a tech theme question.
Yeah, okay.
So, in your tech virtual world, we can do Control and C to copy, Control and Z to undo. But if you could do one of those in real life, would you rather be able to copy and paste in real life or undo in real life?
Would I rather copy and paste or undo? So, I don't know if... I don't think I'd like either of them. but you've given me a forced choice. So in which case I will say copy and paste, because for me, when I think about undo, then I think about like a regret or a mistake. And I have a bit of a mantra at the moment, which is that I never regret any choice that you made. Only regret the decision you used. So never regret a choice that you made. Only regret the information you used if it was flawed. So if you use flawed information to make the decision, then regret using that information. Don't regret the decision. And learn from the flaw in your thinking, or the flaw in the data, or the flaw in the reasoning. Don't regret the decision. Because one of the worst things, I think, is to go through life stuck in a state of stuckness where you're not making any decisions. So for me, it's about make a decision, and then if you regret the outcome, then reflect on the data that you used to make the decision. Don't regret the decision. Don't try and undo what you did. Learn from the data or the information or the way that you reached your conclusion that informed your decision. Don't regret the decision, because making decisions is making a decision is much better than not making a decision. And if you're going to have regret the reasons that you made it or the data that you used. Don't regret the decision itself.
I love that. And you can see, kind of tracking back, that's the sort of thinking that is why we as a species, we don't sort of live in caves scared of the world anymore, because at some point we have to make a decision that might fail, that might result in something that we're not particularly happy with, but we can learn from it and we can move forward and we can try again. Yeah,
absolutely. And what about for you? What would be your?
I can see merit in both. The copy and paste and undo. But I think I'm going to go with the copy and paste. I think there are so many sort of experiences and things that you come across in life that are just so fleeting. Whether it's just a little moment between two people, or whether it's something that you observe between others, and it would be so great to be able to replicate that little moments of magic. I do a lot of work in the world of sort of team development and teamwork, and every now and again you come across these little magic teams that there's just something within them, and they're often there just for a little short time, maybe a week or so, or a couple of days of absolute optimum working. And if you could copy and paste that and replicate it, what could be achieved? On a more superficial note,
go on.
I very much enjoy wine, but I get extreme anxiety about the fact that very often, if you open a bottle of wine, even if you bought the same type of wine, you're never going to get exactly the same one again. And
really?
The idea that you could put something and have that exact same experience, taste, etc. Yeah, I like that. If I could hit copy and paste on a bottle of wine, happy days.
Yeah, see, I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that. I thought you were going to go, if I could hit copy and paste on the time I drank a bottle of wine and I wasn't hungover, that would be great. That's where I thought. That's where my mind went. Anyway,
unfortunately, that has never happened, which tells you about my wine consumption habits. Okay, so shall we get started?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so this is a year in review. And you did do a little mini review around episode 13, where you sort of took stock and looked at where you'd come from so far and what had been going on, and that you were going to take a bit of time off at that stage in the podcast.
Yeah.
You've come quite a way since then. Let's start off. How does it feel to be a year in?
It feels really good. And it continues to be something that brings me joy. And I remember in that episode I talked about how, or was it in episode 14? I can't remember which one it was. It was either 13 or 14. I talked about how, was it in my blog? At some point around that time of the year, last year, I talked about how doing the podcast brings me joy, and there was some, there was stuff happening with me being ill and the impact that was having on my kind of mood and my mental health and stuff, that just meant that I was grumpy a lot. And doing the podcast meant, because I was in pain a lot, so being in pain a lot makes you grumpy a lot. And doing the podcast brought me, I sort of talked about how I continued to do it because it was something I could A, do from home, B, didn't involve me travelling anywhere, C, brought me joy. And that's still the case now. So when all of the conversations that I've had with all of the guests along the way, I just love doing them. And it depends how you frame it. So is it because I'm nosy? Maybe. Or is it because I'm curious? Definitely. So by my use of maybe and definitely, I've indicated which frame I prefer. But I really, really enjoy finding out more about people, about what makes them think, about what makes them feel, about how those two things kind of interact and overlap. And then I also get enjoyment from the impact it has on others then. So when I get tweets or messages, or when I see shares from other people when they're sharing the podcast, and they're talking about how it might have resonated with them, or how helpful they found it, or how it got them thinking differently, or how they want to listen to it multiple times because there was so much in there they couldn't grab hold of it first time round. That sort of stuff makes me really happy as well, because part of what I want to do, which is about shifting the narrative around emotion in the workplace, there's only so much I can do on my own. There's only so many conversations I can have. There's only so many businesses I can work with. There's only so many hours in the day, and I really see the podcast for me as a way of changing that narrative on a broader scale, because I can have one conversation that can be listened to by 200 different people. And that, and if it resonates with only 10% of those, that's 20 people who are going, right, that's really got me thinking about either anxiety if they've listened to the one with Tony Jackson, or about humanising the workplace if they listen to episode 19 with Sarah Taylor, or that's really got me thinking about how we interact with other people if they listen to episode 12 with Dawn Archer. So if these different episodes are having an effect on people, and it's then shifting their thinking, which I don't know if it shifts their actions, but I know their actions aren't going to change if their thinking hasn't shifted. So if I shifted their thinking, there's a chance that their actions are going to change, and if their actions are going to change, then there's a chance that can be better for people in the workplace. And if I can feel confident that I am affecting people's thinking, then I will work with the fact that I believe that will then change into action, and that will then have a better impact on workplaces around the globe.
And was that the original reason that started you thinking about producing your own podcast, around shifting thinking and getting people changing their narratives?
Yes, in part, definitely. So when I did, so I spent a long time from. So 2013, I think, was the first time that I really properly dedicated some time to think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? So I set my company up in 2011, and I knew then that emotion was important to me. I knew then that having a strong evidence base was important to me. I knew then that I wanted people to have an extraordinary experience in the work they did with me, but back then I didn't have a reason to do that. I didn't have like a really clear idea of what that was, and so the purpose as it sits now, which is I promise to make work better for everybody by placing emotion where it belongs, at the heart of work. And I do all of that to either enrich lives or to provide protection or reduce harm. So it's a bit of a long purpose, but I don't really care about that. It covers all the key aspects of what I do. But that is my fifth version of my why. So in 2013, I started on I want to create happiness. That was what I wanted to do. That was my kind of raison d'etre. That was right. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to create happiness for people. Then that kind of evolved into, I want to create conditions that allow happiness to flourish. And then I got thinking about the credibility of happiness as an emotion in the workplace, and the more I thought about the positive intent behind what I was trying to do, actually, if there was a word that would better sit where happiness was, it would be creating contentment, because happiness for me is used in one word is used in two different ways. So there's the momentary happiness, which is the happiness that you feel when you experience something pleasurable, whether that be you see someone you haven't seen for a long time, you smell a smell that just reminds you of your past, you eat some amazing food, you hear a joke, so that happiness is that fleeting moment, that fleeting emotion of that momentary emotion of joy or happiness. And that happiness can be, you could be laughing at someone else's misfortune, but whatever it is, something that brings you pleasure. But happiness is also used to describe states of contentment, where people are overall kind of happy with their lot. So in the last episode, the one came out this week, Monica Parker talks about how people can be massively engaged and hate the fact the toilets are dirty.
Yes.
And that's a good example of, overall, that person is happy and content in their work and their workplace, but there are things that they would love to change. They'd love it if the toilets were clean, So and likewise, I think and this is where I wanted to move away from it just being about happiness for me, because actually, to aspire for people to be only happy in the workplace, I think is a fool's errand. It's a flawed aspiration to have, because it's just rubbish, really. You can't have an emotion where people are only happy, partly because, as you and Suk talked about in your podcast on optimism and positivity that you did for Suk on his 3 Good podcast, overbearing happiness, if it taken to its extreme, will mean that you'll take unnecessary risks, you will ignore data that says that this is the wrong thing to do, you will chase highs all of the time, so it could be disadvantageous to individuals and workplaces to be perpetually happy. So that's where I thought, right, I don't want it to be just about happiness. Actually, this needs to be much more about all of the emotions in the workplace, and making it okay to experience different emotions, because emotions are fleeting. I think this is the bit that I get frustrated by, in that if I'm angry, so let's say I have what's called, what a researcher would call a flooding out moment, which is where the emotion gets to a point where my sort of filters or my ability to regulate my emotion is inhibited, and you will see, say, me being really angry. So that could be me shouting, it could be me hitting a desk, it could be me slamming a door and walking out of a meeting, it could be me telling somebody to go away in a less than polite manner, and often those instances then are viewed as that being something to do with a character, so they then become a trait. So that momentary emotion of that flooding out or outpouring of anger then becomes a trait. Or they're an angry person, or they are irritable, or they are it becomes a trait for the individual. And depending on the severity of that, absolutely, appropriate disciplinary action may need to be taken depending on what it was. If somebody's flooding out involved them hitting somebody else, then that is a clearly inappropriate action in the workplace. But I think we too often go to those extremes. So we either go to, it's extreme in that we're hitting somebody if it's anger, or we want people to be happy. And for me, there's a whole massive range of grey area in between. So like when I remember being part of a team where somebody was called, they're just awkward, they are just a pain in the ass, and if there's a way they can like stop you getting where you need to get to, or put a barrier in the way, then they will do it. And I said, are you sure that's what they are? They are obstructive, or they are annoying. Is what them as a person, or is this about their Could it be about their personality, and that they, where they're really good at identifying flaws or downsides in what you're doing, or actually is it that they're not being heard on something else, and what you're seeing is the display of frustration at not being heard, or frustration at not being recognised, that's playing out in different ways. But rather than go and ask somebody, rather than go and ask that individual and try and find out what's happening, we just make an assumption that they're just awkward. And all of that is just unhelpful for me.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long monologue.
Oh,
sorry.
not at all. And what a wonder! You answered a few questions I was about to ask you there, which was around your different versions of your why. You mentioned you're on your 5th version of why. I really like that distinction between happiness and contentment, and that idea of happiness being happy with your lot. And I really resonate with that. There's a degree of kind of emotional maturity that comes with that. I forget the attribution, but there's a quote running around, if you don't know how much is enough, the default is always more. And
that's nice. I've not heard that before. That's nice.
And you can apply that to all sorts, can't you? You can apply it to things like salary, or to the accumulation of things, or it could be around relationships. But the idea of, if you don't have a conversation with yourself at some point and say, how much is enough? When am I prepared to say, yeah, this is enough, I'm content with my lot, your default will always be, I want more, I need more.
See, I also think, though, that applies to an individual. The risk is I'm going to quote all my back catalogue of stuff now.
Do it.
But I will self-censor and do it anyway. I did an Ignite talk at the L&D show in 2016, I think it was. Or it might be 17, I can't remember now. And again, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But it was along the lines of, am I enough, or when am I enough? And it took me a long time to get to a point where I was able or satisfied to say to myself, I'm enough now. For a long time I was chasing things that I felt like I needed. So to a certain degree, even my MSc and completing that was a chase, because I'd never shown, because I never went to uni, I never did an undergraduate degree. So 17, 18, finished my A-levels, got the lowest grade possible that you can get before you fail. So I got 3 E's when I was predicted a B and 2 C's. And I really should have failed those exams, and I don't know how I got through, because I did no revision whatsoever. I was far too busy working at McDonald's, earning money and having fun. But I always felt like I let my mum and dad down by not going to uni. And I always, I remember the look on their face when I handed them my A-level results, and I said, yeah, well, never mind, doesn't matter anyway, I'm off out the pub. And I remember being in the hallway, literally just handed them the envelope, turned around and walked out the door and went out. This is about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was just on a session all day. Because I genuinely didn't care. And part of that, I guess, if I look back on it, part of that was about me rebelling, part of that was about kind of pushing back against their expectations, but also part of it was that I just didn't find anything that interested me academically. I was interested in people. And even when I did sociology at A-level, it was all about Marxism and Leninism and socialism and all that. And I was like, I don't care about any of that. I want to know about people, and I want to learn how, what happens in the way that people interact with each other. But I do know that I was chasing that for a long time. There's been other things that I've been chasing as well, and I'm not sure when it was. I can't pinpoint it, but I remember getting to a point of thinking, you know what? Yeah, I don't need to chase anything else. If there's other things I want to do, then I'll do them because I want to do it. So do I want to do a PhD? Yes, but I'm not chasing that. For me, I can feel the tangible difference in my in my outlook at that. That part of the reason I did the MSc was because I was chasing that kind of attainment of academic level. But this isn't about, PhD isn't about that. I've got, I'm okay with, I'm enough with what I've got. I want to do a PhD because I want to do that, but I'm not because I want to do more research. I want to do more. I want to publish more papers. I want to write. I don't want to write more because I don't like writing. But there's other reasons I want to do the PhD, which isn't about chasing something. It's just not about chasing the badge or chasing this or chasing the other. It's doing it because it's doing it whilst knowing that who I am and what I do is enough. And the risk is, there's a risk in that I sound like this kind of, annoying, not annoying, what frame do I want to put around it? I sound like somebody who, doesn't ever feel inadequate or doesn't ever feel any of those things. And that's just a load of shit, because I do. I still feel all of those things. But I find it a lot easier now to remind myself that I am enough. So could I charge higher fees? Yes. But I know that what I am is enough, and I know what I charge is enough. Could I do more of this stuff? Yes. But I know that I don't need to do that. I could do it, but I don't need to for me. And sometimes I'll feel a psychological pressure or put pressure on myself to do more of these things or do less of these things or change this or change that. And I have to remind myself, no, you reviewed your lot a while ago, and you looked at your lot and went, I'm really content with my lot, actually. There's other things I'd like to do, but if you were to say to me, Phil, this is it. This is it. It's going to be this forever. I'd go, brilliant.
Yes.
I'm happy with that.
And gosh, what a great step to get to. Some people go through their entire lives and don't reach that step. Sadly, I think that's very much the case, where people just strive and strive and strive, and for more and more and more without really having that conversation with themselves. Do you just going back to that step in your life where you had, there must have been a conversation you had with either yourself or with somebody else or with a group of people where you decided to take that step to focus on what you focused on for your MSc. Can you describe that step? Did you have a conversation with yourself? Were other people involved in that decision to undertake your MSc?
No. So yes and no. So no, if I'm honest, nobody else was involved in the decision. So I made that decision. What I then needed was to secure the support to allow it to happen. So once I found the MSc, then I knew straight away. As soon as I knew of its existence, I was like, that's it. That's that. If that's it, if there's something that's going to get me into studying, then this is it. Because it was about everything that I love. It was about emotion, it was about credibility, and it was about deception, and it was about the interplay of those three things, and it was about psychology, and it was about linguistics, and it was about sociology, and it was about I know some of these disciplines overlap. It was about pragmatics, it was about linguistics, it was about theory of mind, it was about applications in corporate and forensic and other settings. It was just everything I wanted, because it was all about people, and it was all about, and this for me I think is one of the bits I think that makes me different. Is a lot of people focus and if I run the risk of, if I'm disparaging to anybody, I don't mean to. What I'm advocating is my view of things as I sit here today. I think a lot of people focus on what goes on within. So whether that be through personality profiling, whether that be through cognitive psychology, whether that be through neuroscience, whether that be through whatever discipline you choose, a lot of people focus on what happens in the mind. Now there's another group of people that focus on what happens between. So they focus on what happens between people, what happens, how do, so you might include something like linguistics within it. So linguistics is the study of language use. So that's analysing what happens between people, not what's within somebody's head. And for me, what those two disciplines miss loads of stuff, because those that go on between, those that focus on what goes on between, don't link that then back to what goes on within. And those that look within don't translate that to what goes on between. And that for me is a massive oversight. you can't just look at what happens within and not then consider what happens between. And you can't just look at what happens between and not consider what happens within. So my supervisor for my research project, so where my PhD is going is researching this notion of face and face work. And that's about the kind of micro identities that we negotiate for ourselves in the interactions that we have. Now, the sociologists only look at what happens in the interaction. And I'm saying to my supervisor, but we're missing a trick. We have to link this back to what happens within. This has to link back to individuals' reality paradigms. This has to link into individuals' sense of self and identity and personality and the way that they see and articulate themselves. Because the way that I describe myself to myself in my head will then show up in what happens between. So to just look at what happens between and not consider what goes on in the head, that's just bonkers for me. And likewise, if a neuroscientist is saying, oh, this is what's happening in the brain. So when I'm showing people these sorts of images, or when I'm asking them to lie in an fMRI scanner and think about these things, this is what's happening in the brain. Well, that's lovely, but that doesn't translate across to what happens. To look at that in isolation without thinking about what happens between is really limiting. It's limiting in the scope and the application and so on of your research, because people don't walk around life inside an fMRI scanner. So there's no point in saying when people are doing this is what's happening in their brain. No, that was what happened in their brain in an fMRI scanner when they were presented with. Because let's think about it. Right? Oh God, I'm on a soapbox now. Right. So we've got neuroscience research that's happening. What's invariably that's involving different equipment. Either it's involving an MRI or an fMRI scanner, or it's involving an EEG, or it's involving another one, a PS something, I can't remember what it is. Some EEGs are portable, some P thingamajiggies are portable, but an fMRI scanner, so if you're talking about real kind of in-depth brain scan analysis work, then you can't. And then if you haven't been in an MRI scanner, it's like a big tube that you have to sit inside, and then a magnet goes round. So playing you sounds is tricky because an MRI scanner is really noisy, and all that's left then is to show you pictures. And if you were to recall, if you were to have an audio conversation with somebody when you're in an MRI scanner, that again brings big risks, because MRI scanners need stability. They need you to be still to analyze to get accurate and clear images. So if you're asking somebody to have a conversation, then that's going to involve, and you're doing a brain scan, bearing in mind the conversation is going to involve movement of the mouth and the mouth, movement of the chin, potentially movement of the nose, and all those sorts of things, then that risks movement. And if people are moving, then the images are less clear. So for all of the neuroscience research that is done, I challenge the majority of its validity in the workplace. It's interesting, don't get me wrong, I find it absolutely fascinating, but the transferability then over to the workplace is really, really tricky.
So your listeners can't see me at the moment, but I'm beaming because I'm reminded suddenly of the first time I came across you and your thoughts and your experiences that you share with the world, which was via Twitter. And it was one of the big sort of L&D HR Twitter hours that take place during the week. And something that I instantly started associating your name and Twitter handle with was a word beginning with C.
I don't know what you mean. I don't know what that word is. So the one with C that ends in T, that one.
It absolutely is. It's the context bell. It's the context bell, and we can ring it. I wish I brought a bell with me because I was starting to sort of ring it in my head there. But it's so right, and it is. It has to take place with the interplay between two, and it's the same with so many other aspects of life. And you're looking at design thinking as well, where you've got an architect or a designer. They would never design something in isolation like a chair. You design a chair that has to set place within a room, and that room has to sit place within a house. The house has to sit place within a street, within a city, within a town, and so on. All of those things interweave together to create an experience that other people observe and interact with. And just as you've described there, the interplay within things. If the context piece is missed, you lose out on a lot of richness. So how did at the start of the podcasts that you do, bringing this back to the review of your sort of 12 months, you talk about the interplay between three constructs that you describe as overlapping. So do you want to say something about that? What are those constructs, and how do they overlap? And why did you choose those three?
So in a way, I didn't choose those. So are we talking about emotion, credibility, and deception? Those three?
Yes.
Okay. So in a way, I didn't choose those three. I was introduced to those three through the MSc, I suppose, in a way. So, I was aware of those three things, but I hadn't necessarily linked them together in that way. If I may, I'll play with it with an example.
Good.
So one of the forming kind of so I'm using my past experience plus those three lenses to kind of decode something that happened for me. So one of the jobs I used to have was in a call center, and I was good at that. I could often understand and really empathize with customers that were ringing up, and I did that job really well. Now there was one call in particular, and the lady and I went round and round and round in circles. We were at we took two very different positions, and mine was then siding on the side of the company, and hers was supporting her view. And after about 45 minutes, I leant over to the kind of headset, or the turret as it was called, and on there was a mute button, and I hit the mute button, led back in my, because she'd opened a monologue, so she started, so I'd learned that when she said this particular phrase, that meant she was going to go on she would have a number of seconds, if not a minute, of monologue, because she was going to lay out her position again. So I leant over, hit the mute button, and said, I suppose it's my podcast, so I can swear. So I leant over, hit the mute button, and said, you know what? Why don't you just shut the fuck up and stop crying like a bitch? And then in my ear, I heard pardon. So I hadn't hit the mute button.
Okay.
So she then, so I then tried to explain it away. I'm sorry, did you hear that? I was talking to a colleague opposite who was being really noisy, and they were distracting me from talking with you. Meanwhile, filled with panic, filled with regret, and in an instant, I'd gone from being really angry. And because I've been doing all the classic stuff. I've been pacing around, sitting down, standing up again. So I've been getting more and more frustrated with this lady, unjustifiably so, by the way, when I look back on it with reflection. And now I was filled with regret, filled with fear, filled with more anger, but this time directed at myself for either A, not hitting the mute button, and B, just saying it in the first place. And then she hung up, and then I went on not ready, which is a button you could press to signify that you weren't able, so no calls would come through to you when you're not ready. And I just sat there and I waited and I waited and I waited, and then I saw it. And so if from the desk I was sat at, the lady that took the call was at my 10 o'clock. So, the classic kind of fighter jet analogy. So she was at my 10 o'clock, and I just saw her head pop up and look direct at me, and then slowly kind of slink back down again. And I was like, there it is. There's the call. Then the phone on my line manager's desk rang. She looked up at me, looked over at the lady, and then my boss went over. No, she didn't. Then the call got put through to my boss's desk. So I just stayed sat there, and I just stayed sat on not ready, sat stock still, not knowing what to do. And then, once my manager finished, she said, "Get out to the canteen. Wait for me down there. I'll be down in a minute." And she came downstairs, and she asked me one question, and that question was, "Did you do it?" Now, at that moment, those three disciplines of emotion and credibility and deception were all at play in my mind. So I've been sat there downstairs thinking, how could I explain it away? What could I say that would maintain my credibility? I had a really strong reputation. I'd been performing well. I'd had two kind of mini promotions. I was, I was on track to, to continue my career, and I'm sat thinking, you know what, I really need to be fired for what I've done. So how can I do it? How can I save myself? Because I was riddled with emotion. My credibility was massively at risk here, and the temptation to lie was huge because I didn't want to admit that I'd done it. Because if I admitted that I did it, I might get sacked. And if I might get sacked, then I'd have to tell my parents that I've been sacked. I'm going to have to tell my girlfriend, because I was with my wife at the time, we weren't married, but I'd have to tell my girlfriend that I've been sacked for doing this. Then they're not going to be able to provide me a reference, which means that for this 5 years of work that I've had, I'm going to not be able to provide a reference for that. So that's not going to be great for any future employment either. So my career prospects are nosediving. My whole life is like falling apart in front of my eyes. And the temptation to hide was huge. Because I was ashamed. I was really ashamed of what I'd done. So when she asked me, did you do it? I sat and I just said, yeah, I did. I said, I'm really sorry, but I did. She went, go home, come back in tomorrow. Come back in I can't remember what time she said. Go home, come back in tomorrow. I'll let you know what we're going to do. And that night was awful. It was just the worst experience. Went in the next day, and she said to me, here's your final written warning. If you do anything like this again in the next 6 months, you're out the door. Keep your nose clean, and it'll go in time. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. Couldn't believe it. And I said, why? She said, because you admitted it. If you'd have done anything else, I'd have sacked you. But because you said, yeah, straight away, no excuses, no reasoning, no nothing. You just went, yeah, I did. And not in it wasn't like in an arrogant way. It was, she said, I could see the regret kind of written all over you. And that was kind of, so that day was really pinnacle for me for a few different reasons. So one, because what I think it does is it really illustrates how those three disciplines overlap. So if you then think about the workplace and you think about, say, something like mistakes, everyone talks about, we need to create cultures where people can make mistakes. That is so easily said and massively hard to do, because a mistake is seen by individuals themselves. Because if you ask most people, if you make a mistake, does that make you look bad? Yes. So in my words, does that risk your credibility? Yes, it does. So therefore, if something's risking your credibility, then that's likely to trigger emotions in you. Now, which emotions it will be, I could have a good guess, but let's just go with emotions for now. So therefore, the temptation to hide that mistake, especially if it's a small one, I mean, mine was monumentally big, but if it's a small one, then it could just be easy to hide that and brush it under the carpet and not have to worry about it, because you want to maintain your credibility. And it's it's the reason why senior leaders won't admit mistakes. It's the reason why people will hold back communication. It's the so they, and just using mistakes as an example, but it's that interplay of those three that I get really fascinated by, because deception doesn't happen without feelings, and deception doesn't happen without people thinking about their reputation or their credibility. People can't think about their reputation or their credibility without it involving emotions, and then without them being concerned about how other people might see them, which means they want to manage the information. And deception is a very evocative word, but there's a real spectrum of what counts as deception, and it even depends on what definition you use of deception. But if I put that to one side, so and that moment was also really kind of pinnacle for me, because it was the day I decided that I had to pay more attention to my emotions. And at the time I phrased it as, I won't let my emotions get the better of me again. And I can't say that's happened, because emotions have got the better of me many, many times since then. But that was I was always kind of aware of other people and myself. But that kind of moment of being told, no, you're not going to be sacked, and here's your final written warning, that steeled something in me then to say, right, these things are crucial. And if you can't work with these, what I wouldn't at that point in my life, I wouldn't have used these words. But if you can't work with these things effectively, then you are always going to be on the back foot. So this matters. You've got to pay attention to these and manage these and work with these differently, because what's happened can't happen again.
Can you, talking about emotions, can you remember the emotion that went through your mind when you received that final written warning? What what were the series of emotions that happened when she handed over that written warning and you were clearly expecting something else?
So surprise and then relief. Just and also and whether this is valid or not, I don't know. But if that manager rang me now and asked me for something, I would drop everything and do it. So I have a huge sense of indebtedness to her for doing what she did. Now I don't know for sure whether it was her decision to do that. She certainly left me with that impression. She certainly left me with the impression that she could have sacked me and she chose not to. So it's not like this was someone else's call or someone else's decision. But the sense of indebtedness that created in me was then huge, and wanting to make it up to her and to myself was there. So yeah, initially surprise / amazement, relief, but then a real sense of, right, I owe you. And anything you want, I will work I'll work my arse off for you. Anything you want, anything you need, I'll do it. Because and this is where it then goes back into credibility now, because now I'm like, right, I have to make it good. I have to repair. Because so if I use the language that I would now use, my competence face, I had taken a massive chunk out of my competence face. I had lost a huge amount of competence because it got around. This isn't something that was kept quiet in a call center of 50 people. A, people heard me say it. B, then people knew that I'd been sent down to the canteen. I hadn't come in the next morning, and all of that sort of stuff. So this was, it was common knowledge. So I knew that I had some repair work to do. I had to repair my competence face to be able to do my job and do it well. But I also needed to repair my personal face, because people were like, really, Phil said that? Really? I know he likes a bit of a sweary in the pub, and not in the office, and never with a customer. So I had a lot of face repair work to do, and also I needed to kind of demonstrate the trust that was shown in me. So I couldn't let my manager down. I couldn't let her down, because if I did, then that would look bad on her. So as well as having to repair my face, it was, well, I can't screw up again because she's given me a chance. And if whether she did do this or not, I don't know, because I never asked her. But like in my mind, I'd envisioned her pleading my case in the dock with HR as the judge, or the senior leader as the judge, or whatever it was, and her pleading my case for me to stay. And then if I then let her down, she'd then have to go back in and say, yeah, sorry, I got it wrong. So I'd imagined this whole court case where she'd been there, wig on and everything, pleading my case. So I couldn't let her down. It just wasn't an option.
I'm interested in that repairing a face piece. Maybe we'll stay with that for a minute. And before we do, thank you for the story. That's such a compelling story, and I'm sure that there will be listeners there who have been in those moments, those sort of life-defining moments of shame that you end up revisiting, in the dark hours, and you wake up in the middle of the night and you go, oh my gosh, did that really happen? That really happened to me. How did I let myself get into that? And I'll happily share with you one of my own. It's not on the scale of yours, but it's something I put in my shame well that I revisit regularly. So when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time working in hotels and restaurants and the sort of service industry, and there was a hotel I was working in. When I think I must have been about 17, and it was one of those kind of restaurants that had a carvery and an hors d'oeuvres plate, like a chilled hors d'oeuvres plate. You don't see them anymore, really. But
I know what you mean.
I remember drifting over to this woman who I could see was struggling at the hors d'oeuvres plate. She was trying to pick up some melon balls or something, and I sort of approached her from behind and just sort of said gently, "Oh, can I offer you a hand with that?" And she turned round, and to my horror, she only had one hand. She was missing a hand.
Oh no!
And I kind of clocked that instantly as she turned round, and in my surprise, rather than sort of apologising or explaining, I just let out a kind of a laugh, like like that, and it was just involuntary. So, and this woman's face turned from kind of shock and surprise to anger in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And I'd realised that not only had I kind of looked like I'd insulted a disability, but I'd then laughed at her through no, absolute, in purely innocent intentions. And I sort of scurried off into the kitchen, spent the rest of the night polishing cutlery, and I in that particular instance, that story got around as well. She made a series of complaints. I didn't get fired, but I decided at the time, I never would have used this language, but the loss of face was too much to repair, so I just left and got another job somewhere else.
Yeah.
So in your example, and for those listeners who are sort of listening in around these types of examples that we see in the workplace, what steps can people take if they are going to repair face? What sort of things need to happen? A repair job.
Yeah, so face is a bit of a tricky thing in that it's never exclusively yours to own. So part of your face is always on loan to somebody else. So what I mean by that is, so face is a version of ourselves that we negotiate in the interactions that we have. And there are, but because it's a negotiation, unless we have, I'll come back to power a bit later, but because it's a negotiation, what that means is that other parties need to agree. So if I am going to take a line, if I'm going to negotiate a version of myself as somebody who is this, or somebody who does that, or somebody who knows this, that needs to be accepted by other people. Now, in the main, it will be. And this links back to a guy whose research is just massively underutilized, a guy called Jeffrey Leach, who talks about something called the cooperative principle, which is, in general, people will cooperate in interaction. People will cooperate with one another. So if I say this is something that I'm known for, or this is something that I'm good at, or this is something that I know, or this is an experience that I've had, then most people will go okay, and they'll go with that. They won't actively disagree or challenge or not allow you to take that line. Now, there are times, though, when that won't work, where you will try and take a line and other people won't let you do that. So an example of that is where, say, you're in a meeting and you're not the chair. So you're not the chair, you're not the facilitator, but you're annoyed at the conversation and you want it to move on. So you do something to try and move that conversation on. So what's happening in that micro kind of moment is when I say, come on, we've spent long enough on this, can we just move on now? I am trying to negotiate a line or a face for me of someone who has the ability to move this meeting on. So someone who has enough influence or enough sway to move that meeting on. Now, whether that meeting moves on or not will depend on the strength of my face. So if I don't have the credibility or the influence or the power or the sway, then my negotiation will be ignored. People will go, no, we're not ready to move on. Actually, we need to stay with this and explore it for longer. A different example would be I was in a meeting with a board once where the HR director started talking about the financial performance of the company. I think I mentioned this in one of my previous podcasts, and the finance director wouldn't let them do it. I said, that's not your role. Your role is people. My role is numbers. So if someone's going to talk about the financial performance of the company, that's me. So the finance director in that example saw the HR director trying to talk about numbers as a threat to their face. They were like, no, that's me. That's not you. So when you say how can people repair, so part of it is about actions that you take, but part of it is about other people then accepting that your actions are enough to do the repair job. So when somebody's crossed you, or they've disappointed you, or they've done something that's really surprised you, at what point do they then get accepted back in, or what time do their contributions then get accepted back in? And as the individual who's made the transgression, you cannot dictate when you get let back in. And I would argue that's part of the reason that you chose to resign rather than stay, because actually it might have been it would be more work to repair that face than it is to go off and negotiate a new one somewhere else. So how can you repair your face then? So one of the things that, so I haven't answered your question, and now I will. So one of the things that humans, as we look for, is consistency. And often a loss of face is because you do something that is inconsistent with the face that you've negotiated. So in your example, say you negotiated your face as an attentive, supportive, customer-focused individual, and maybe just an all-round nice guy. And what in your interaction with the lady at the dessert area is actually you lost some of those. You acted in a way that was inconsistent with those versions of you that you negotiated. So one of the easiest ways to repair your face is to then go back to being consistent, is to consistently deliver in line with the face that you've now negotiated with yourself. Now, one of the decisions that you've got to make is, do I try and restore the face that I originally had, or do I try and negotiate a new one or a new version of that face? So for me, as an example, another decision I chose to make was, and it's not about shouting it from the rooftops, but if people asked me about that incident, I would be open about it. So I chose to own the mistake. So rather than go back and negotiate the face I had before, which was, Phil doesn't talk like that. Phil doesn't interact with customers in that way. Phil is a safe pair of hands. Phil will always deliver. Phil will, and Phil's an all-round nice guy. Then that was the face I had before. So the face I didn't language it at this time, and there wasn't even a conscious thought to say this is what I'm doing. But as I look back now, I can see that what I decided to do was to negotiate a new face, which is I screw up and I work hard to fix it. That's the face I'm now taking. I'm going to own the screw up, and I'm not going to shout it from the rooftops, but if people ask, I will be open. But I will, the face I'm going to kind of renegotiate for myself, or the way I'm going to repair my credibility, is by doing yes, I screw up, but I only screw up once. I don't do it again. I learn my mistake and off I go. So one of the key tenets about repairing face is consistency, and it's acting in a way that's consistent with the face that you've negotiated. But to a certain degree, you've got an element of choice, even though you may not be aware of it, about, well, what line do I want to take now then? So now this has happened, what line do I want to take with this from here? Because different people take different lines. Some people will take I don't talk about that. Yeah, that was horrible, just don't talk about that. That's then part of the face that they're negotiating. They're negotiating we ignore that, we carry on face. And you've got to a certain degree, you've got choices, whether those may be in or out of awareness, but you've got choices about the type of face you renegotiate for yourself.
Okay, I like that. So it's about consistency and the choice that you make as to whether you restore the face that you had or renegotiate a different face, a new one. Yeah. Or
a new version of it. So one of the things I don't like about face is the metaphor we often use is a mask, and I don't like it because a mask implies you're trying to be somebody else. But I can't think of a better one. So all of these behavioural masks that you wear are still your face, so they're always you. So it's not about you pretending to be somebody else. It's not like, oh, I'm Phil, but I'm going to pretend to be Mark. It's I am Phil, and I'm negotiating these different lines. But is solidity a word? Is that a word?
Yeah.
The solidity of those masks then change over time. So when you first negotiate a line, when you first negotiate a version of you, so this is the one of the most relatable examples of this is when somebody gets promoted or a new role within an organisation. So I've worked. Take an example. I worked with a HR business partner a few years ago, who had started as an admin assistant, then a HR advisor, then a HR consultant, and then a HR business partner. Now, there were a collection of managers who would regularly ask her to do things like meeting minutes, issue letters, that sort of stuff. And the reason they did that is because that's what she used to do when she was a admin assistant and when she was a HR advisor. Now, what she hadn't done was successfully negotiate a new version of her face, which is, as a HR business partner, I don't do that stuff for you anymore. So what she wanted to do was to let go of those tasks, but those tasks were the individuals, the managers in question, had associated those tasks with her identity, with who she is. Or this is something that they do. This is what they're known for. This is their actions that they do. So it's part of the face that she negotiated. Now, if she left and went somewhere else, she wouldn't have that. That issue would disappear in a heartbeat, because what she's doing is she's negotiating a new face. So yes, she comes with an element of competence because she works in HR. She'll have a job title, so that will bring some certain associations with it. But the face that she'd negotiated for herself as a HR advisor was still fairly solid as a HR business partner, and her the face that she wanted as a HR business partner wasn't very solid either. So she had like this mix of faces. So yes, she would get involved in the business partnery, strategic-y stuff, but also she'd get pulled in to do minutes and issue letters. So what she when I was mentoring her, my advice to her is, what you need to do is you need to explicitly renegotiate your face with these managers in particular. You need to sit down and discuss with them and negotiate with them what is your role and how will you best support them in what they do. And one of the challenges we got with face is that the negotiations we do are often very implicit. So we don't know that we're doing them. Other people don't know that we're doing them. So when you find yourself being dragged into stuff that you used to do in the past, or you're being asked to do things that you don't want to do, or you are being asked opinions on areas that you don't feel comfortable with, then that's because other people's version of your face looks different to how your face looks to you. So to you, your face looks like this, but other people look at it and see something different. So the more you can do to make your faces explicit, then the clearer people will be in what they can expect, what they want, and how to interact with you.
I'm thanks for that, Phil. It's another great example there, another nice story of how this would come through in the workplace. I love a metaphor, so I'm going to volunteer one. Feel free to challenge it.
Yeah, go. Okay.
So if we're gonna put the masks metaphor aside for talking about face, as you were describing your story and that previous story, I started thinking about houses and rooms in a house, and that the many faces that we wear could be analogous to spending time in various rooms in the house. There'll be some that we prefer spending time in. There'll be some that we don't spend that much time in and suffer as a result. And occasionally, but there's a choice to be able to do that. There's a choice as to where you spend time investing in that face and replenishing that face and being comfortable with presenting that face to the world. And I guess when damage occurs, you've got some choices as well. You can repair that room exactly as it was, restore it to its former glory, or you can replace it, or you can extend it, or you can move.
So I like it. Can I play with it for a minute? So how do we bring in the dynamicness of interaction into that then? So you're in your house with your rooms, and I'm in my house with my rooms. How do we bring the dynamism of interaction to that?
Okay, so when the face that you present when you're in that room by yourself can be different to the face that you present when you have guests around.
Okay.
The choice that you make in order to present it in such a way that says, I don't know, in this, if we just play with the analogy, I am somebody who keeps a clean and tidy house. I fill it full of beautiful things, and I'm very welcome and hospitable, and you're welcome to spend time in this room with me, reinforcing your opinion of me in this room as much as you like. Whereas when that person leaves, you might be happy sort of leaving things lying around. Maybe you present yourself to yourself in a different way through the lack of urgency to establish that face or negotiate that face with another person.
So I like that as a way of thinking about the distinction between within and between. So because for me, what you just described then was what I would call impression management, which is I'm okay with a little bit of mess. I don't want I can't cope with it being filthy, but I'm okay if there's a little bit of mess. But if somebody's coming round, it has to be tidy, because I want people to see me as somebody who has a clean, tidy, well organised house or room, whatever that might be. So I like, because for me I get really interested in that that transition that goes from how do I see myself to what then do I portray to other people. So like my internal face and my external face, if that makes sense. So and this is where you could argue that actually a mask as an analogy does hold weight, because if you imagine like a classic mask on a pole like you'd have in theatre, I can look at the inside of that mask and go, this is how I want this to be seen. I want to be seen, this is how I'm imagining my face looks. But what I can't see is what's on the other. When I'm holding that in front of me, what I can't see is what other people see. So other people might see a slightly different face to the one that I'm looking at from the inside. Or I might say, this is the face that I see inside, but I don't want people to see that. So I'm going to manage how people see this one on the outside by, pretending or adapting or masking or covering or something like that. So actually I don't want what I see internally and what the external representation, I want them to be different in that way. But I don't know how it would work in that. So with the house metaphor, because I can't bring my room to your room, if that makes sense. So if you and I are having, so I talk about four families of face in the workplace. Well, that's what my research is telling me there are. Now there may be more because I'm in early days of my research, but my research so far is indicating to me there are 4 families of face in the workplace. So one of those is competence. So that's your knowledge, your skills, your expertise, what you're known for. And typically is associated with the tasks that you do, the objectives you are tasked to meet, that sort of stuff. Then you have your company face, which is where you represent the organisation that you work for. So you and I are we both describe ourselves as nerds and geeks and being interested in evidence and research and background. So that's both of our we have a shared competence face in that way, or shared element of a competence face in that way. But we wear 2 different company faces. I wear the Emotion at Work company face, you wear the TMSDI company face. So we both represent the organisations that we work for. Then you have your relationship face, which is the relationships that you then hold with other people. Now, even though I'm delineating these faces, often they will overlap. So there was a really interesting discussion that happened recently on the Good Practice podcast. So, name check to the Good Practice podcast. So there was a live podcast that happened in London, and Martin Cousins at LearnPatch on Twitter put a challenge in the room around our ability, L&D's ability to create acronyms and lingo and language that to describe stuff. And Ross Garner's response to that was, but we are within a community of practice where we have a relationship with each other. So this is where, so in this example, I'm overlapping relationship and competence base. We have a relationship with each other where we know each other in this room, and we have a shared level of understanding. So actually, for us, being a group of 50 L&D professionals in a room together, we are allowed to use that language because it is appropriate in our community of practice. If, for example, we were with a different group of people, so this is back to my favourite context thing, if we were with a group of managers within an organisation, you know what, it would be more appropriate to use none of this language and to use something much more plain English and understandable, because the relationships that we hold affect the interactions that we have. And if you know somebody well, you will interact with them differently to somebody that you've just met for the first time. So and different faces will be at play in that way. And then the final one, the fourth one, is your personal face. So this is your you as an individual, your interests, your passions, your family, your friends, your commitments, your values, your beliefs, everything that you kind of bring. And so and if you imagine there's a stage, and in the middle there's a spotlight, and if there's two people in the interaction, there's 8 faces on that stage. So if we use you and me as an example, there are my 4 families of face and your 4 families of face. At the moment, in the spotlight in the middle, right now, is my competence face as a practitioner and your competence face as an interviewer for a podcast. So they are the 2 things that are in the middle. Not long ago, both of our personal faces were in the spotlight, because I talked about my example in the call centre, you talked about your example in the restaurant. So now you could argue that potentially on the periphery of that spotlight was our relationship face, because actually we get on really well, we're comfortable sharing those sorts of stories with each other, and on the periphery of that spotlight is our competence face, because we are talking about ourselves in the workplace and our actions and our tasks. But at the core of it, they were personal stories that we were sharing. So at any point in time, you could have 2 or 4 or 6 or even all 8 of those families of face in the spotlight, or so you could have all 8, you could have just 2, and to a certain degree, people will choose whether they put their face in the spotlight or not. So when I used my example earlier on of when people asked me about my mistake, I said I owned that and I put that in the spotlight, whereas other people go, yeah, I don't want to talk about that. So somebody might say, oh, what happened with that customer? And I've got a choice now. Do I put that in the spotlight or do I leave it on the edge of the stage? Now you might say, what happened with that customer? I'll say, oh, nothing, it was nothing really, just a small misunderstanding. And you, as my compatriot in the conversation, you might go, all right, okay, fair enough, and leave it. Or you might say, no, you know what, Phil, I'm not going to let you get away with that easily. And you then try and drag it back in. You go, that's not what I heard. And you drag it into the spotlight, and I could resist you again. And I go, well, I don't know what you've heard, but I can tell you that it was nothing major. It was all right. It was fine. Nothing to worry about. And I'm dragging it away again. And now, again, you've got a choice now. You could drag it back for a 3rd time and go, well, I heard actually that you swore at a customer and that they made a massive complaint and that you came really close to being fired. And again, I can resist or allow that. So I could resist it again and go, well, the rumours of my downfall have been greatly exaggerated. So I'm using some lovely linguistic strategies to not admit or deny what you're kind of suggesting. But what I'm doing is I'm resisting you. I'm saying, no, I don't want to put that face in the spotlight. I want to leave it out. Please, thank you very much. And these negotiations, and this is where I say part of your face is always on loan to somebody else. This is a negotiation that you and I are having. You're wanting it and I'm resisting, or you're wanting it and I'm giving it, or we collaborate together and we put whatever we want to put in the spotlight. So these interactions, these negotiations are happening constantly, all of the time, in all the different interactions that we have.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and great challenge on the house front. I do get that. I can't bring my room to your room or vice versa. That doesn't quite fit, does it?
I want to think about, not now, but that's something that I think off air it would be useful to explore and kick around some more.
And I guess that's quite a nice link into a change that happened over the course of the last 12 months in your podcast, which is you introduced something different. You had some interviews, a sort of interview style with expert in particular areas, and then you introduced a new element, which was emotional work stories, which started with Amanda Arrowsmith at Ponte Carlo Blue, talking about imposter syndrome, and then since then you've had you referenced it earlier on, Tony Jackson talking about anxiety, and then also Amy King talking about burnout.
Yep.
So can you describe a little bit about what was going on there in terms of introducing that new element to the podcast series and
So it was feedback from listeners, actually. So it was I can't remember who it was. I want to say Annette Hill, but I'm not sure if it. I wouldn't. I'm not 100% sure that it was. But I got feedback from one person in particular, and then when I mentioned it to some other people, so I got the feedback and thought, oh, that's interesting. I've not thought about doing that before. Which was, you know what, Phil, I really like it, and it really makes me think. But what would be great is to hear like some real personal experiences of people, you know, with emotion in the workplace. And I thought, yeah, that's a really nice. Actually, you know what? That's something that I haven't done before. That's something that we haven't included. So then I asked a few other people and said, "What do you think?" And they were like, "Yeah, that'd be really, really great. That'd be really, really interesting." And then I put a call out on Twitter to say this is something I want to introduce into the podcast series. You know, who would be up for contributing? And Amanda was first to put her hand up, and she talked in the podcast about how she put her hand up and then she went, "Oh, but I'm sure there's somebody better than me." And then Amy, she and I got talking because we'd known each other for a while, and then we got talking, and she was sharing her experience with me, and I then asked her after we'd finished chatting about it if she'd be interested in, would she be willing to share it as a story. Likewise with Tony, and then we've got some others kind of coming up as well. But it was, I guess, there was when that initial request came in, it got me thinking to go, well, that actually is whilst I am in the podcast at the moment, my focus is on helping people understand what is happening, either in their culture, in their organizations, in their interactions, and decoding stuff and giving them understanding as to what's happening when different things are occurring. Actually, one of the key ways that emotion is will affect change in individuals, but also if I want to change the narrative, then I can't just change the narrative by almost taking like a third party stance on what's happening in the workplace. So there needs to be some first person narrative around that as well. So yeah, that's where the decision then came to do the stories series. And it's interesting, I'm finding a few challenges with it, and when I share these challenges, these are then open requests to get people to engage. So one of the challenges I'm finding is men, and so Tony is at the moment is unique in that he's the first man that agreed to do an emotional work in stories piece. I've got one coming up on depression, which is going to be really interesting, but again, that's with a lady, not with a man. And I'm not making any gender stereotypes with that. What I'm saying is I would love to have a more male voices talking about their stories around emotions in the workplace. Now, whilst a lot of it has focused on stuff that you might plot on a mental health spectrum, so anxiety, burnout, stress and burnout, imposter syndrome, depression to come, I'd be really happy to chat with someone who's had an experience like you in the waiting environment, in the restaurant environment, or me in the call center environment, who is willing to share their experiences with emotions in the workplace. To get a broader, diverse range of experiences and individuals on the air would be amazing. Because one of the things I'm really conscious of is, I use terms like imposter syndrome or burnout or anxiety, and they are single word labels for a huge, diverse spectrum of experiences that people have. So how anxiety manifests itself for Tony, as an example, might be demonstrably different to how anxiety manifests itself for somebody else. How imposter syndrome manifests itself for Amanda might be demonstrably different to how it manifests itself for somebody else, and the experiences that they've had in there, because we're all different, we're all unique in that way. So even if, my plea to the listeners then is, even if you're thinking, oh yeah, but you've already had somebody on talking about that. No, I had somebody on talking about their experiences with that. That doesn't mean that topic is now done or that topic is finished. There's more exploration, there's more work to do.
On a connected note, I noticed yesterday, as a podcast that I've only recently started listening to, has jumped to the top of the UK podcast list, and it's called Griefcast. And in
okay.
it, they have comedians and other sort of personalities come on and talk about their experiences of grief. And it struck me listening to an episode the other day just how there are lots of connections to how grief is affected by and produces effects at work. I think there would be a lot of mileage in having a conversation with somebody about their experience of grief, because they can, again, as you say, they can be hugely varied and enormously nuanced, and one person's experience of grief and how it manifested itself in their work could be very different from another's.
I've had 2 different conversations with 2 different people in the last 2 months, and neither of which are willing to come on the air because for different reasons, but about grief. Because again, it's another one of those taboos, that's not talked about. I did some coaching a while ago with a client who had a close family member who'd been diagnosed with a terminal disease, and they were getting very emotionally charged about the ways that other individuals were interacting with them. So some would ask directly in front of other people, "How is insert name of family member?" Other people would say nothing. Other people would mention the disease and then go, "Oh no," and then get really uncomfortable. And I said, "Look, you got a call to make. Or you got a couple of calls that you could make. One call is that those people that are doing things that you're finding unhelpful, I think that the kindest thing you could do to them is to go and tell them what you need." So it's to tell them, "You know what when you see me, can you ask me how I am, and not ask me how insert family member is, or can you just like give me a nod and as a way of indicating, or I said whatever you want it to be, but the best thing you could do to help those individuals is to tell them what you need from them. At the moment, they're kind of firing in the dark. They're doing what they think is either what they would like, or what they think you like, or what they think would be the best thing to do. The best thing you can do is to go and ask, go and be explicit and say, "This is what I need from you right now." So if you ask me, "Am I okay?" and we're on our own, and I say no, what I don't need you to do is to solve my problems for me. I just need you to accept that I'm not okay and be all right with that. I don't need you to ask me any more questions. I don't need you to counsel me. I just need you to allow me to say, "No, I'm not okay. And I'm here, and let's go on with some work." So what at the moment are implicit assumptions that people are making. If you're finding it uncomfortable, then I guarantee they are as well. And what would make you both more comfortable is make it explicit. Go and have that explicit conversation that says, "This is what I need from you right now. Oh, and by the way, I might change my mind next week. I might even change my mind tomorrow. But as I feel today, this is what I need from you. And is it okay if I let you know if I change my mind about what I need from you?" And if the answer to that is yes, then great. Then go for it. I said, but they're not doing it to, she said they're doing it to annoy me. So that could be the case. Yeah. Or or they're insensitive. I said it could be that they're insensitive. It could also be that they're just doing their best with the situation as they know it, or what they think is the right thing to do. But yeah, I'm struggling to get people that are willing to come on at the moment anyway and talk about grief.
So it feels like we're moving into a space of what could the future look like, the future of the Emotion at Work podcast. And so if you and I could wave a magic wand and put someone on your guest list by this time next year, do you have someone in mind, or do you have a series of people in mind that you would absolutely love to have on your podcast over the next 12 months?
So one person who's been on my wish list since the start of the podcast is on. I've got a pre call with them this evening because they're based in America. So I've got a pre call with them this evening where we'll agree the frame, how we'll set it up, what sort of questions I'm likely to ask, what we're going to explore, where I'm going to go, that sort of stuff. And as that individual's now confirmed, they'll do it. Or is it too premature? Yeah, so it's the world's leading researcher in something called emotion regulation.
Okay.
Now, emotion regulation for me is a much underused term. So it happens all of the time, but people don't language it in that way. And it's a very specific part of something like a broader definition of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is partly about awareness of emotion, and then people talk about emotion management, but for me it's not about emotion management. It's the term is more, well, if it is, there's something before that, because emotion management is something much more cognitive and deliberate because you're managing it, whereas emotion regulation is maybe a bit before that, or maybe it needs to replace emotion management, which is how am I working with and regulating the different emotions that I'm experiencing. And often people think that emotion regulation is about regulating it down, and that's just the biggest load of rubbish. Emotion regulation can involve regulating the emotion up or down, or regulating it at a level. It's not, it's not always about, and this is where I challenge the narrative. The narrative is you should, reduce the intensity of the emotion. Why? There are some contexts where actually you want more intensity in the emotion. There are also some contexts where you want less intensity in the emotion, but it's not always. For me, the default is we regulate it down.
Yeah.
Rubbish. It can. There are times where we might need to regulate it up or to maintain it at a level. So he's on. In terms of,
and will you be playing the Warren G and Nate Dogg song "Regulate" as you introduce that program? I hope so.
See, right, so now in my head, you've started off a train of thought, which is, can I work my introduction in a way that it would mimic the rap?
It was a clear white night.
Clear white night. It was a clear black moon. Phil Wilcox was on the street trying to consume a guest for the podcast, and I said, "What's up? I need him over there to come and give me the heads up," or something like that.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
We did not prepare that, listeners.
We didn't.
Slightly. That was right up the top.
So that's one. Who else would I like? So I think one of the things that's been missing for me this year is. I want to explore getting more non-HRE people on the podcast. So, and in particular, then, so that's kind of, I guess, in a way, business leaders. So I've said from the start that I wanted to get practitioners, researchers, and business leaders on the podcast. And there are some, say, like Monica Parker from the last one, who is a business leader because she's a founder of her company Hatch, but she's also a practitioner. But she's also within kind of HR. She would say she's not, because she's in to human analytics and so on. But broadly speaking, she's into HR. So I think the only guest I would say that sort of fell outside of that camp so far was Ben Fletcher, who we had on episode 3, I believe. Finding more people. But again, this is what I'm finding a challenge is finding business leaders that will openly talk with me about the role that emotion plays in their workplace, because that isn't the narrative. That's just not the narrative around work. So I kind of haven't answered your question in terms of I've answered it more in terms of type of guest. So I'd like to get more business leaders, more diversity. In the guest pool that we have, whether that be by gender or other, and more stories, more people who are willing and able to share their stories.
And so I wouldn't be much of a coach if I didn't ask you at least once what sort of things you're hoping to do to try and get that type of guest on board. What sort of strategies, options might you deploy?
So I've got some time allocated away next week to go back and search through the mental health awareness tag from last week.
Nice.
So I'm gonna go back through that feed and have a look if there are any people on there that I think would be interesting guests to have on, who've got interesting stories to tell, whether that be personal stories or doing interesting research or have got interesting areas in the field, beyond that I don't know is the short answer. And I haven't thought about how to secure those people yet. the thought is I'd like to secure more of those. But beyond making the request on this episode of the podcast and then doing some searching, that's about as far as my thinking has gone.
Brilliant. And of course, if anyone's listening in and knows how we could start to make this happen, please just get in touch. I'm sure you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Please. So either phil@emotionatwork.co.uk or you can find me on Twitter @PhilWilcox.
So should we start moving to wrap things up? I've got some questions that you normally ask your guests at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, go on.
So I'm going to throw them at you this time. So based on what we've talked about today or anything else that's in your sort of sphere of experience and interest, what books, videos, talks would you recommend for people to find out a little bit more about what we've been talking about?
So if you're interested in face and you haven't done so already, then I would recommend you go back to episode 12. So that's me and Dawn Archer talking about impression management. So I'd recommend going to search that out. I'm looking at my bookshelf and I'm like, oh God, which ones do I pick? So there's a book by, I think it's George Yule, which is called Pragmatics. So face is part of a broader linguistics and sociology discipline called pragmatics. Pragmatics is about how we make sense and meaning of interaction. So it covers more than face, but it gives a really nice if you're interested in what happens between, it gives you a really nice place to start in terms of the different ways that you can analyse and decode what happens between. So the only thing I'd probably... So it covers things like politeness. It covers things like... it covers things like politeness and impoliteness. It covers things like speech act theory. It covers things like face and face work. It covers things like... what else does it cover? Well, that's enough. So it's a really good... It's a good starter for 10. It's a short read, and it costs about £6, I think. It's an accessible book. If you're interested in face in particular, then you want to read work by Irving Goffman. So you could pick any one of his, really. So you've got The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. You've got The Interaction Ritual, which is another good one. You've got Forms of Talk, where he looks at the different types of talk that you have, and then there's another one called Frame Analysis, which is where he starts to introduce and look at framing. So a lot of George Lakoff's work stemmed from Goffman. If you're interested in what happens within, especially from an emotion angle, then you could look at something like Emotions Revealed by Paul Ekman, or you could look at some work, a couple of books by Antonio Damasio. You could start there as well, but Damasio takes a very brain-centered look at it, so he kind of comes at it from a kind of a neuroscience, cognitive psychology angle, whereas Ekman comes at it from a more of a psychology, just a normal psychology, traditional psychology angle. Or if you're interested in identity, and I've plugged this one before because I've introduced one of the authors to the podcast. So it's a book called Everyday Talk by Karen Tracy and Jessica Robles. That's a really nice one. Great. As well.
Fantastic. I just a very quick build on all of those. At the start of the podcast, we were talking a bit about perception management. I read a great book recently by an author called Bo Lotto. Lotto. And it's called Deviate: The Science of Seeing Differently, and it's all about the psychology and biology of how we perceive the world around us. Really, really
nice.
Fascinating read, and full of lovely kind of visual examples as well, for people who still appreciate picture books.
Wonderful. You'll have to send me a link so we can put that one in the show notes.
Absolutely. So as we tie it off, I'm going to first off start by saying a huge congratulations. As one of your fair listeners from day one, well done on getting this far. 12 months of podcasting glory is something that no one can take away from you, and I know it's something that people have really, really enjoyed and appreciated listening to, and have sparked off new ideas, new conversations, and fresh thinking. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
And is there anything else going on for you that you're thinking, feeling, or want to say before we close off?
So yeah, a couple of things. So one is a huge thank you to you for agreeing to host today. I'm very grateful for your hosting ability, but also the prep and the work that you put in beforehand. So I'm grateful for it. It's been really good being on the other side, actually, for a change. It's been nice. I feel like I've been a bit kind of shouty at times, but I don't know why have I said shouty? I guess I'm not used to advocating for so long. I've been very advocacying today, and I'm not used to that on the podcast, I think, because I normally take the inquiry type. If we were to use some dialogic Isaacsy language, normally I'm the inquirer, whereas today has been I've been the advocate. So it's been good though. I've enjoyed it. Good. Well, long may it continue. Maybe we'll be back here again in 12 months' time. In 12 months' time,
yeah, your 2-year anniversary.
Yeah, that'd be really good. I don't see any reason why not. So, already in the can and ready to go is an episode that maybe is actually a year overdue, which is me talking with a guy called Cliff Lansley, who's a long time kind of friend, business partner, mentor, where we unpick some of the real core basic stuff around emotions. What are they? Where do they come from? How do they work? What is emotional intelligence? Is it even a thing? And so we unpick some of that real kind of core stuff. And then we've got Joe Stevenson. That episode is in the can. So Joe and I talk about emotion at work in emotional exploitation.
Oh, wow.
Which is a really, really interesting discussion. I've got another one, as I said, lined up with my world's leading researcher in emotion regulation. So it looks like we're on a good start for another year. So I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for being. I'm going to take the reins off you, and I'm going to close the show if that's all right. So, thank you very much, Mark. Oh, so if people wanted to find out more about you, lovely Mark Gilroy, how can they get in touch with you if they wanted to?
I am mostly on Twitter these days, so you'll find me on Twitter at @MarkGilroy. I'm into all things psychology, coaching, technology at work, leadership. I'm very partial to podcasts and also photography, and very recently became a dad for the first time. So at the moment, you'll find me tweeting at all bizarre hours. Do not adjust your sets. I'm doing okay. And
good.
I am the managing director of a company called TMSDI. We offer psychometrics for team development, leadership, helping improve conversations at all levels, and you can find out a bit more about us at tmsdi.com.
Fab, thank you. And you have a blog as well that you haven't plugged. Do you want to plug your blog?
I do indeed. It's taking the photography approach, it's snap-leadership.com.
Wonderful, thank you. So that's something that one of the things I didn't mention earlier on about the podcast is that I've really fallen out of love with writing, which I know I'll have to change if I do a PhD, mind. But that's one of the things that I've loved most about the podcast is it's allowed me to get into really good discussions and do some really good thinking without me having to write it, because I just get to explore it. So thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for hosting the Emotional Work podcast for us for this episode. Listeners, thank you very much for your time. It's another long one, so I think we're just about to top out an hour and 40. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for listening. If you'd be ever so kind, if you enjoy what you hear, then please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps other people find us, and you can also follow us on iTunes or on Podbean or Stitcher or Overcast or wherever it is that you get your podcasts from. So thank you very much for taking your time to listen to the podcast today. Thank you, Mark, for coming on the podcast and being the host.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you again soon.
You've been listening to the Emotion at Work podcast, written, recorded and presented by Phil Wilcox, edited together by Simon Leverton. You can find more information at emotionatwork.co.uk or follow us on Twitter at @PhilWilcox. Thanks for listening.